everybody. We're just excited to bring you information about healthy, holistic, romantic relationships on today. We are a part of the Shakti Wellness team. I am Sherelle D. Kennedy. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor associate. I'm also a Reiki master teacher. While I am a therapist here at Shakti Wellness, I also own my own business, which is Doc Ships LLC, in which I'm also a relationship coach. So I'm a therapist plus relationship coach. On the therapy side, I tend to work with high-functioning African-American women. And on that side, I'm really seeing what's going on with relationships, what the issues are. And then on the coaching side, I'm seeing what really happens. And so I'm here with my colleagues so we can bring to you some educational information that we know. So I'll let everybody introduce themselves. Go ahead and start with you, Spencer.
Hi guys, I am Spencer Scorsoni and I am an interning therapist at Shakti Wellness LLC. I'm also a Reiki master practitioner. I'm going to be talking about relationship with you all today. It is a huge passion of mine. I work with couples primarily. I also work with parenting. So it all sort of builds in together to feed this holistic picture of wellness and relationships. And I'm really excited to be with you guys to talk about that today.
All right, Aisha, you're up.
Hi, I am Aisha L., licensed clinical mental health counselor as well as Reiki master practitioner. I am a therapist here at Shakti Wellness, and I am also the co-founder of the FACTS Initiative, which we serve children and families here in the Charlotte area. We work with families as a whole. I work with individuals inside of that family unit, and that could look like a couple or with parenting, just on how to better themselves so they can show up better and functioning in those relationships.
I hope that in us really talking about relationships today, we can just really bring a fun aspect to it. Now, with that fun aspect, I do want to bring this point of housekeeping. We are talking about relationships relative to an educational purpose. So we're unsure if abuse or something more prevalent may be really a part of your relationship. But if it is, we're asking that you go get help. But the framework in which we're talking about is just relationship on a whole for educational purposes. With that being said, we do want to give a little bit information about abuse. And so a lot of times when we talk about abuse, we're thinking about like physical abuse a lot of times. But there are other aspects of abuse that are really invisible. And so a couple of those aspects of abuse that are invisible, and I'm going to pull it up, are cultural, emotional, financial, intellectual, spiritual, social. So even though we are coming to you today, this is actually pre-recorded. We wanted the chat to really be relevant and address some of the questions that you had, because really this is about just frequently asked questions so you can get things answered, things that you were wondering about. So we'll really respond to you in the chat as we present some questions and speak more about the topic. What type of invisible abuse do you most often see in your work with relationships? One aspect of invisible abuse that I see a lot is gaslighting. So what gaslighting looks like is denying a person's reality, almost making them feel like they are not in tune with what is happening in their personal experience. You know, a partner in a relationship can say, oh, why are you so upset? It's not that bad, or it's not that serious. Well, how can one partner determine the severity of what's happening for another partner? With gaslighting, that's pretty common in minority relationships, just because as a collective, minority members really focus on resiliency. So a lot of the trauma that's happening and things that are prevalent that may hurt an individual, you have their partner saying it's not that bad, they shouldn't feel that way, it's not that big of a deal. You're making too much of it. Why do you always do this? So things like that.
I would agree with that. I see gaslighting a whole lot, and outside of gaslighting, I think I see more so of social abuse. My clientele are mainly female, so I'm going to speak from the female perspective a lot, but I just want to put it out there that this can happen to males too. Like, you're not exempt because you're a male. The social abuse, when you You get in a relationship and everybody becomes one. You become one. You're functioning as a unit. The separate friends become couple friends. And most of the times, what I see is if that couple decides to split, what happens is one partner keeps that social group and then the other partner is left without. Or maybe you come together as a unit and you're functioning as a family, in-laws, sisters, brothers, aunts, cousins, and when the relationship has come to an end, there's one person left with no one. You lose all of your social groups. Everyone turns against you.
Hmm. And to me, I was thinking about it when you were saying that it's kind of like based on sometimes what happened in the relationship. Let's just say one partner cheated on the other. Then all of a sudden, your social group becomes a court of public opinion about who did right and who they have allegiance to. So to
Mm-hmm.
me, that's one of those things that it just gets really icky. But I think that you're right. We don't really talk about that a lot. How do you maneuver those things?
Whose friend can I be? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, you don't want to offend
Mm-hmm.
anybody. Spencer, what type of invisible abuse have you seen?
Yeah, so one that I see a lot is emotional abuse. Um, And a common theme within emotional abuse that I see is emotional invalidation and neglect. So, what this can kind of lead to in the person who is a victim of this is a sense of disconnection with your authentic self, a lot of self doubt, self esteem issues, troubles with trusting other people because you're not really sure what you're going to get in response from them. Emotional invalidation is things like, kind of like what you were talking about, Sherelle, like, that's too much, you're too much. I don't want to deal with your baggage kind of thing. It happens a lot of the time when the partner who is kind of receiving the
Mm-hmm.
emotions, maybe they're having a hard time processing their own emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So having someone else, try to emotionally open up to them, it's like, whoa, whoa, too much for me. I don't have space for this. And that is their own journey and something that they'll want to kind of address within themselves because it'll come off to their partner as you don't really care about my emotions and you don't have room for me.
Yeah, what I've seen, and I always like use like non-sciencey words. The best way that I can describe it, even from that side of the partner who is doing the emotional abuse, they can feel like the overstimulation of emotions from the more highly emotional partner is kind of like emotional throw up. That's what
Yeah.
I always call it. They're like, what to do? What to do with
Yeah.
this? So yeah, I tend to see that. So that was some really good points. I know we had some other questions I definitely want to get through to make sure we're covering everything because I think that we're really hitting on topics that people really don't talk about a lot. But if we talk about the body, the question that I kind of had was really based on a comment. So researchers found a connection between the quality of the relationship and what's happening with the central nervous system of each partner. Are you finding this to be true in your work?
Yeah, so I think that nervous system dysfunction and dysregulation is extremely prevalent and common in our society, especially with the go, go, go and kind of suppress your emotions being, the messaging that a lot of us receive. A lot of us will sort of push ourselves really beyond the limits of our physical abilities and kind of get really stressed out. That adrenaline starts going, that cortisol starts going, and it really takes a toll on our physical health and it can make our nervous system so edgy that we're really kind of living in survival mode and no one can really access like the decision making part of your brain when you're living in survival mode. So it's a lot about connecting into your body, feeling that nervous system dysregulation and making steps to address that
Mm-hmm.
issue.
So, with me and the stuff that I see about the central nervous system, is basically the central nervous system is the center in which we use to understand trauma, right? And so we each have different responses to trauma. So we can do the fight, flight, or freeze. But now the newest response that's being discussed is fawning. So what I'm finding is that one response of one partner can be more abrasive to the response of another partner. So like one partner, when they're faced with trauma or faced with just uncomfortable decisions, feeling like they're backed into the corner, they may fight. Whereas their counterpart, their spouse, may freeze. So then they feel like, what are you doing? You're just stuck there. You know what I'm saying? You're not doing anything. You're not acting. Or maybe you have one partner also, and it could be a different combination, one that fights and one that flees. So you have one who's ready to tackle whatever issues that are, coming away. And then the other one's like, I got to go. And so that's just really not accounting for the trauma responses that the couple has. And because we talk about the central nervous system, it's pretty hidden, right? Like we're not even thinking we're going toward those types of responses. But if it's a situation where there's an argument or some clarity must be had about a sensitive topic, and you have one partner who's like, let's just sit, talk about this, tackle this, who's really immediate in that fight, and then the other partner is like, let's talk about this next year. Like, let's not, it just creates for, an uncomfortable situation.
So I think when we look at the quality of relationships versus the central nervous system, a lot of what we don't take into account is past traumas, and that can be past traumas of other relationships. It could be like romantic relationships or relationships with parents or friends. Most people don't take the time to heal from those things, and so the central nervous system, it didn't heal. It still thinks that it's existing in the past. And then we are in this new relationship, and it can be the most loving, healthy relationship ever. However, your mind is still back in 2012 in this past relationship. And so, although you're receiving the things that you need from your partner, your body doesn't recognize it. And then it causes dysfunction in the new relationship.
Yeah, I think you brought up an amazing point, right? Because there's this book called The Body Keeps the Score. And of course, I cannot say the author's name. I wish I could. I think his name is like German, but The Body Keeps the Score. And so what you were pointing out, Aisha, is basically that body remembers when it was essentially in war. And the body can't tell the difference between war and peacetime. So
right,
you do have those people who are in really loving relationships, and they're like, I just no. Like
like don't touch me, even though the touch is an appropriate and healthy touch, because their mind is still in, well, when I was in this past relationship, it started off as this touch, but it ended up in this physical altercation.
One of the things that you're making me realize, Aisha, essentially one of the arguments that you definitely see on the couch is like, basically, why do I have to pay for the past mistakes of that other person? And it's really not that you're even paying for the past mistakes of the other person. That body just is still in the past. So they're not making you suffer. It's almost like the tape is on repeat.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I love the idea of couples therapy. But when you're not doing your individual, when you haven't worked on yourself, then when we look at couples counseling, like how effective is that going to be when you haven't figured out yourself and your stuff? They go hand in hand.
Yeah, I love that because I think that I often have a hard time when couples are coming in and they're seeking help. And then I'm like, hey, it's kind of like you want to pull one to the side or even both to say, hey, go get individual. But then it's just kind of facilitate what that one spouse was thinking. And they're like, see, I told you were the one with the problems. Because in couples, what happens is we like to blame each other because the idea is if it's your fault, then you know enough to fix it. But that's the issue. If something's going on with one partner, they may not know how to fix it. So it doesn't matter who blames who. You know what I'm saying? There's no tools there to be fixed. And so, what you brought up a good point, and I think Spencer can also speak to this, is that like when people come to couples counseling, they are looking for you to be the referee. Like what?
Yeah, I feel like that is so true that in the initial stages of couples work, a lot of the time people are really just feeling so unheard that they're like, can you just tell me that I'm right, please? And looking at me like, did you hear what they just said? Did you hear what they just said? But over time, it becomes like, oh, I'm starting to see the other person's perspective now. Maybe I wasn't really listening, but yeah, for sure, in the first chunk.
Yeah. It's the other portion is the spiritual component. A lot of the things that we have to think about healthy romantic relationship is like, what is even your take on the purpose of relationship? And I think that a lot of times, like when we have first dates with people, those are not the things that we're talking about. It's kind of like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite color? But it's like, we're not talking about like what is the purpose. What do you think the purpose of what we're doing is? And a lot of times I hear kind of like we help each other to heal, complete one another and things like that. But my take on the purpose of relationship is really different. I feel like um, the professional that I tend to gel with is a woman named Dr. Nicole. I think it's La Perla. Um, and she talks about relationship in such an amazing way. And she says something that I definitely agree with. And it's basically to the effect, in my words, of like relationship is supposed to be this soil for individuals to grow, but mutual freedom is supposed to be there. Like evolution is supposed to be there and growth. But a lot of times when we talk about relationships, for some reason people come 50-50, meaning two half people making one whole, where it should really be like two strong towers. And if you're not two strong towers, the relationship itself should be healthy enough soil for you to unpack your stuff, for you to personally deal with it, not your partner or making your partner deal with it. I think that that's where we go wrong sometimes, because essentially, because the relationship is healthy soil for you to grow and evolve, what happens is when you start unpacking, you never seen yourself in that way before. So you actually think it's your partner that's doing it to you, that's creating this ugliness. But it is the relationship in itself that's just kind of bringing, like, opening you up. It's like this I don't know, like I don't even know that analogy, but just kind of like opening you up so like all the little stuff can come out and kind of like disperse and be dealt with.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that relationships are kind of like shadow work because who better to trigger you than your romantic partner, But it's still about you though, and it does take that kind of holding the mirror up to yourself to look inward and be like, okay, yes, I'm triggered right now. I could blame it on the person, but it's also something about me and my story and my wounds that is making that trigger happen. So if you kind of are present with a relationship and you really like plug into awareness seeking, I feel like it can be such a transformative experience for both partners because there's that support, there's that maybe someone's holding my hand, but yeah, I am gonna kind of hold the mirror up and
Yeah.
you know make make room for the pieces of me that this relationship is letting out.
Yeah, so you said some good stuff, and I don't want you to like zoom by it. You talked about shadow work. Like, can you talk to us a little bit more about shadow work?
Yeah, so I think that so shadow work, just to kind of give a little brief description of it, is basically sitting with and acknowledging and then accepting the parts of ourselves that were shamed away, that were maybe guilted away, things that we didn't allow ourselves to own as part of ourselves for whatever reason. That can be cultural or societal pressures not to identify with that, or even sometimes we feel like we might not be allowed to identify with certain parts of ourselves. And those all become part of our shadow. And it's just a part of yourself and your psyche that you're unaware of. And it could be a great part, and it could be a not so great part. But a lot of the triggers that we experience will bring those shadow elements to light. And that's why we're feeling so uncomfortable when we're triggered. We want to push that back down and no, that's not me. That's someone else. I don't know who that is. But I think relationship is such a beautiful experience in that it can transmute those shadows or the way that we interpret them about ourselves. And maybe we don't have to hide those things anymore. And maybe we can just accept them as part of who we are.
Yeah. I think you like brought about like a lot of healing when you were like, maybe we don't have to hide those things anymore.
Yeah.
I think, and I'll just kind of like touch on some of that. So essentially, because I think about codependency as well. And so sometimes I feel like individuals in a couple, they just kind of get stuck sometimes at the icky part of like, oh, I can be myself with this person, right? Like, let me let out that part. But you also talked about like transmuting, like changing it into something else, like that is more acceptable to your wellness, to your health. Because I think that sometimes in some relationships, some partners just kind of like, this is who I am, this is the way it is, sort of thing. But I'm like, I feel like the other step is missing. So it's like, I accept you as a human being, but it does not mean that I have to suffer as elements regarding elements about who you are, especially if as an individual partner, I don't really feel like whatever, you're into or whatever's happening is a part of the lifestyle that is healthy for me. Does
Right.
that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that a huge part of partnership is holding each other accountable and not kind of becoming that enabler for our partners, right? Like maybe, so for example, like, I don't know, maybe you both have the same shadow aspect of yourselves, and it's like, oh, I can be free to be this way, but it might be toxic. It might be that sometimes you like to drink too much and then you go out and make a bunch of noise, and if you don't like that about yourself, and then you feel guilty about it. But this person makes you feel okay doing it, but it's not necessarily what's best for you and your personal growth. So yeah, I think it's important to focus in on that aspect of, yes, it's okay and I hold space for who you are, but also I care enough about you and respect you enough that I'm going to call you out when I see you doing some kind of stuff that isn't really serving you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm like, you make me want to like keep thinking about this and keep talking about this. I guess I'll just throw out the other thing. So that makes it hard in codependent relationships, especially so like if we're talking about drinking, right? And then you have the drinking is what we bonded over, right? That trauma bond sometimes, right? And each of us are accepting of it, right? But then all of a sudden, one individual in the couple says, I want to change. All of a sudden, that tosses in a totally different dynamic to what you connected on. And so, essentially, the partner who might be identifying, I'm not going to do this relative to health, then they're the ones who are actually toxic to the relationship. They're the ones who have changed.
Right. Yeah. And that's so much of that. So I feel like that you just hit on something where it's like, that is the turning point in so many relationships of whether you're going to set your boundary and be like, nope, that's my boundary and take it or leave it, or if you're going to set your boundary and allow the other person to hold you back.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So now I feel like I have to say another thing. So you talked about the good therapy word boundaries, right? like, like I always think boundaries are pretty funny in the way we discuss them. So I just think of boundaries as a little different from what I see people and couples use them as. So I always call boundaries borders, and they're not walls. So if I'm talking about borders, I'm talking about going into another country. So if you're going into another country, like they say, like these are the rules that are governing this country. And while you're at the border, you can either decide to go there and, like respect what's happening, right? And really even making that commitment at the border, or you can decide not to, right? Like, I mean, even if we think about like people who have ill intent at borders, they're like, do I want to risk it? Do I not? But if we're using boundaries as kind of like walls, then it's like boom, it's a brick. It's right there. Like there's no choice to it. So if we're at a border, then you're making the choice. Do you want to go in or not? Like it's your choice. And you're saying that you're going in on the pretense that you accept everything that was discussed. And so what that looks like is those discussions are happening prior to any issue. Because I think we like to, again, throw boundaries out as walls, because it's almost like we're in a fighting stance. It's like, okay, you know what? You did something that is not, what's conducive to me. Boom, here's my boundary. And it's like, that's the worst time. When there's conflict, it's the worst time to bring up a boundary. And so a lot of times those boundaries are being discussed in such a calm and collected manner that consent can be given. It is so hard trying to get consent after something has happened.
Yeah, and once the boundary, like, so in that example where someone's throwing up a boundary after the fact, it almost feels probably in some cases really unfair to the person too, because it's like, well, you just changed the rules in the middle of us playing the game kind of thing. And, there are certain boundaries that maybe can be assumed, but honestly, a lot of them are cultural. A lot of them are based off of your own experiences and your history with other relationships. So it's really important to like have that proactively, have that border conversation. And I love that. That's such a great metaphor for what that means.
Yeah, and then so I really work on that, because it's really hard to explain when couples are coming to you already upset.
Right.
It's like, hey, let's think about borders. But this has been really good. I can see it's a topic that all of us get really excited about, just because I feel like it's almost like we as a people have this notion that we know how relationships work. And so we come in already thinking that we're good at them. But even for me, like as a wellness professional and even learning a lot of stuff, I'm like, yo, like we need to be educated. Like there needs to be classes. There needs to be, and it would lead to a lot less confusion, because I think we're learning more about relationships through trial and error. And the risk of learning about them through trial and error is that really after misunderstandings happen, after a number of times, it's really kind of hard to go back to a fresh space. So yeah, so I am definitely gonna wrap it up here. Did you have any closing things that you wanted to say?
I just want to say this was awesome. I love talking about this with you, and I love the topic of relationships and couples, and I'm just happy that I was part of this.
Yeah, thank you. I always get excited, like I said, you being the other person at the agency that works with couples. And so what we'll do to wrap this up, just because we also are here for educational purposes, if someone wants to utilize our services, then we'll definitely drop information in the chat as well as on the screen. And I'm going to be able to share with you some exciting events that we're having as we focus on relationships. So thank you so much. All right. Bye. Bye, everybody.